When he rode into town, no one knew his name. By sundown, he'd bought a widow and her orphan at a public auction, without a single word. Folks called it madness. But what he did next, it lit a fire across the West that still burns and whispers. This isn't a tale about heroes. It's about a broken man, a stolen family, and a past that refused to stay buried. The dust swirled like a restless ghost over the auction yard, riding the wind in circles as if the land itself couldn't settle. Somewhere far off, a bell tolled. 3 slow rings that didn't mark the hour, just the end of someone's freedom. He stepped off his horse without a word. Tall, with a coat that looked stitched from years of riding and silence. Dust crusted the hem like dried blood. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face carved by wind and regret. The rifle slung across his back never shifted, but the weight of him changed the air. No one asked his name. No one wanted to. The auctioneer's voice cracked like dry bark as he stood atop a wooden crate, waving his hand over the 2 figures beside him. A woman and a boy. She kept her chin lifted, though the bruise on her jaw had turned a sick yellow. Her dress hung loose on her frame, like it belonged to someone who hadn't buried a husband, or weathered the shame of debt and public pity. The boy clung to her skirt, barefoot, wide-eyed, half-shadow. Widow and orphan, the auctioneer barked. House repossessed, land claimed. Terms of indenture, 2 years' labor, domestic or otherwise. You know the rules. They go together. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like flies over a carcass. Men nudged one another. One laughed, too loud. Another spat. She didn't flinch. The boy held a small wooden carving, something bird-shaped, or maybe a horse. Worn from clutching. He didn't blink. The silent man watched, unmoving. His hand rested near his belt, not on his gun, but close enough to remind folks that silence isn't always peace. When the bidding opened, only one voice rose. His. It wasn't a bid. It was a verdict. The crowd stilled. Someone coughed. The sheriff leaned on a post nearby, thumb hooked into his vest, eyes squinting like he was watching a man step into a grave he'd dug himself. No others, the auctioneer said, his voice thinned by unease. Silence answered. Sold. The woman didn't look at her buyer. She reached down, took the boy's hand, and stepped down off the crate with a dignity that didn't belong to the scene. He led them away, without a word, through the town's dirt spine, past shuttered saloons, and glances sharp as broken glass. No saddle for the boy. No rope pulling them. They followed like they already knew how. The homestead lay an hour's ride into the prairie, where the land breathed in silence and coughed up memories. What remained of the house stood crooked against the horizon. Half a roof, 2 whole windows, 1 door that creaked like a dying man. The corral held no horses. The fields were dust, clawed by wind and neglect. He dismounted, let the horse wander. He opened the front door and stood aside. She walked in first. The boy followed, holding the carving like a question no one answered. That night, no words were exchanged. She lit the stove without being told. He brought in water and split wood. The boy sat cross-legged near the hearth, watching the flames more than the people. The man laid out a blanket near the doorway and lay down with his gun on his chest. His eyes didn't close. The woman didn't ask why. In the dark, the wind spoke through the cracks in the wall. It whispered stories of blood and thunder, of men who died too far from home, and children born into debts they never made. 3 days passed like molasses. Slow, thick with things not said. On the 4th morning, she found him digging a ditch behind the barn. Not for a grave. Not yet. He was rebuilding the well, plank by rotted plank, hands cracked and bleeding. She joined him. No questions. The boy began to follow him at dawn, shadowing his steps. The man didn't tell him to stop. On the 5th evening, the child held a hammer for him, passed nails, stared at his hands like he was learning a new language. The townsfolk noticed. Not because he bought a widow, men had done worse, but because he didn't touch her, didn't mark her, didn't lock her in, just brought her into a ghosted house and let her be. That didn't sit right. Whispers began that he was a deserter, or a killer hiding under borrowed skin. That the boy was his blood, come back under a lie. Some said the woman had bewitched him, that she had Apache in her, that the boy talked to things in the dark. No one said it to his face. On the seventh day, the sheriff rode out, sat on his horse near the gate, and called out, polite-like. Said he had to ask what the man's intentions were. The man didn't answer. The woman stepped onto the porch, her hands folded, her lips split from biting. He saved us, she said softly. The sheriff frowned. By buying you? She didn't blink. By not touching us. That night, the man burned a stack of old papers behind the barn. Letters faded. Some sealed. Some never opened. He watched the ashes rise like dying stars. The boy stood beside him, quiet as snowfall. You ever hold a gun? The man asked. The boy shook his head. The carving was in his pocket. The man nodded. Good. Keep it that way. She watched from the window. Her hand touched her belly without knowing why. They were still strangers. But the house no longer creaked the same. On the eighth night, the man sat on the porch, carving something into the wood beam with a dull knife. The boy slept inside, and the woman sewed in silence. He looked up once, just once, and said, You and the boy ain't mine. She didn't respond. But you're here now, he added. She paused her stitching. You go to sell us back. His laugh was a gravel-throated ghost. Ain't much for do-overs. She said nothing more, and he didn't need her to. The stars hung heavy that night. The kind of sky that felt like it remembered everything you ever tried to forget. And the prairie wind, for once, didn't whisper anything at all. The days slipped by like smoke, uncounted and unspoken. Out on that lonesome patch of earth, time didn't tick, it waited. The man rose before the light broke, moving through the silence like it was stitched to him. The woman cooked before he returned, setting 3 plates though no one asked her to. The boy ate slowly, eyes darting between them, never speaking unless night made him brave. The land didn't change, but they did. Quietly. The man taught the boy how to split wood with arms too small for the axe's weight. At first, the child missed, nearly caught his foot, and fell. But the man didn't curse, didn't flinch, just stood over him and said, again. The boy tried. Again. Again. Until sweat mixed with sawdust, and the wood cracked like brittle bones. That night, the boy fell asleep with blistered hands and a small smile twitching at his mouth. The man noticed. Said nothing. The woman began tending the garden, though little grew, but stubborn weeds and forgotten roots. She spoke to them anyway, soft things, not quite prayers, not quite curses. The boy helped her some days, small hands careful in the soil. The man watched them from the porch, a shadow with eyes. On the 7th morning, a letter arrived, folded in yellow, stuffed into the cracks of the gatepost. No name, just a black X drawn over the seal. The woman found it, didn't open it. She handed it to the man after supper. He burned it without looking inside. She didn't ask. Later, while the boy slept, she followed him to the barn. You knew what it was, she said. His back was turned. He was sharpening a knife on a whetstone, slow and steady, as if the blade had wronged him. I've seen that mark, she said again. The knife paused. War work, he muttered. Done under another name. Dead name. She stepped closer. Her breath smelled like sage and ash. They coming for you? He turned then, eyes hollow, as the well he'd rebuilt. No, not yet. But they remember. Her hand didn't shake, but her voice did. And us. He sheathed the knife. I didn't buy you to use you. I bought you so nobody else would. She stared for a moment, then nodded once, like she'd expected as much. Just don't get my boy buried in your war. He met her gaze. I won't. That was the first night she didn't lock the bedroom door. The boy began to sleep more soundly, though some nights he whispered in his dreams. Not in English. Not anything the man or woman could name. Once, the man stood at the door and listened. When the child cried out, the man placed a hand on the threshold, then left. One morning, the boy brought him a drawing on rough paper, a house, 3 stick figures, and something that looked like smoke rising above them. A 4th figure stood beyond, with a red X for a face. The man folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. "Ever kill a man?" the boy asked. The man didn't lie. "Yes." The boy looked down. "You kill a boy?" He hesitated. "I spared one." The boy nodded like that was enough. The wind changed that week, heavier, carrying the scent of rain that never came. The air felt full of something unseen. The woman noticed first. She began to check the locks again, reburied the small bag she'd once hidden under a floorboard, coins, a folded picture, a ring that didn't fit her finger anymore. Then the pastor came. He arrived in a buggy too fine for this part of the country, wearing a black coat slick with road dust. He smiled too quickly, words oily and sharp. Said he was checking on souls abandoned by society. Said the Lord kept ledger on those who kept unclean company. The man didn't invite him in. The pastor looked past him at the woman standing in the doorway, the boy beside her holding the carving. "A child like that, he won't survive out here," the pastor said. "Not with them bloodlines. Folks get jumpy when things ain't clear." The man spoke just once. "He's got clearer blood than you." The pastor left with eyes narrowed and lips tight. That night, the man oiled his rifle and loaded shells by the window while the woman sewed a patch on the boy's coat. The child watched both in silence, and something settled in his shoulders, something that hadn't been there before. On the 12th day, the boy asked if he could help with the horses, even though they only had one. The man showed him how to brush the animal, how to whisper near its ears so it didn't spook. The woman watched them from the porch, hand pressed low on her belly again. That evening, the man pulled a tattered map from under a loose floorboard in the barn. The woman saw it by accident. Lines drawn in red, names crossed out. Only one name not scratched. "Yours?" she asked. He didn't nod. Didn't deny it either. "You trying to bury it or finish it?" He lit a match and stared at the map. Both. She didn't ask who the last name belonged to. Some truths were kinder left unnamed. That night, thunder rolled in the distance, but never reached them. The fire flickered low, casting shadows that danced like ghosts behind the windows. The boy curled up on the floor beside the hearth, the carving under his arm. The woman lay on the bed, eyes open to the ceiling, counting breaths that weren't her own. The man sat on the porch, coat drawn tight, rifle across his knees. When the lightning flashed, he saw a figure on the far hill, just for a blink. A rider, watching. He didn't wake the others. Not yet. He just whispered to the wind, "You took too long." Then quieter, "But I'm still here." Inside, the boy stirred in his sleep. The woman rolled over and reached out. Her hand found only the cold space where he used to lie. And outside, the land held its breath, waiting. The rider didn't come closer the next day, nor the one after, but his presence lingered like wood smoke that never cleared, a reminder in the corner of every glance, in the way the man's hand hovered near his belt even when feeding the mule. The land had a way of holding its breath when something old stirred beneath it. And something had stirred. The boy noticed first. He stopped wandering too far from a barn, kept the carving tighter in his grip, like he knew the wind had started whispering in a language only children and the dying could hear. He asked fewer questions now. Listen more. One morning, before light, the man found boot prints behind the chicken coop, too fresh to be his own, too clean to belong to a drifter. He traced them in silence, followed them until they vanished into nothing, swallowed by the scrub and the whispering grass. When he came back, he nailed shut every window that faced the ridge. The woman didn't speak of it, but that night she placed the boy's bed closer to the hearth and sat beside him until his breathing steadied. She held the carving in her lap long after he'd fallen asleep, her fingers tracing the grain like it held a secret she'd forgotten how to read. 3 days passed without sunlight. The sky hung low and swollen, pregnant with rain it refused to deliver. And then the visitor came. He wasn't the rider. Too clean, too polished. Boots without a speck of trail dust, a badge pinned too proudly to his chest. He said he was from the Territory Marshal's office, investigating claims of war crimes. Carried a warrant, though it wasn't signed. Said he'd heard whispers of a name that once belonged to a butcher from the border wars. That the dead had started talking again. The man invited him no farther than the gate. "I ain't got that name no more," he said. The visitor smiled like a man used to winning. "Names change. What don't is justice." The man's voice was low. "You here for justice or a bounty? Ain't always a difference." The woman stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. The boy peeked through the slats of the window, his eyes sharp and unblinking. "You leave them out of it," the man said. "They ain't part of this." But the visitor's gaze lingered on the woman longer than it needed to. "We'll see," he said, tipping his hat as he turned. "See you soon." When he was gone, the man stared at the dirt where the visitor had stood. The boy came to his side, quiet as dusk. "Why did they want you?" "Because I lived," the man said. That night, he dug up the map again, laid it flat on the table. The woman stood behind him, reading the scars in red ink. "One left," she whispered. He nodded. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You need to finish it?" He didn't answer. Not then. The next morning, the boy was gone. Tracks led south, small feet, fast, veering toward town. Panic set in like fire through dry grass. The man didn't saddle the horse. He ran. He found the boy near the church, standing before the same visitor from the gate. The man's heart stopped when he saw the boy hand over the drawing, the one with the red X face, the one he tucked inside his coat. The visitor knelt before the boy, too sweet, too careful. "Where'd you see this man?" he asked. The boy pointed. "He's my father." Silence. Even the crows seemed to hush. The visitor looked up, saw the man standing there, fists clenched, smiled like a wolf. "Nice to meet you, father." The man stepped forward. The visitor stood, hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. But he didn't draw. The man spoke only once. "That's my boy. You come near him again, and I'll carve that smile off your face." The visitor just laughed. "You can't outrun the past, friend. It always circles back." Back at the homestead, the boy stared at the ground, ashamed. "I didn't mean to tell him," he whispered. "He said he could help." The man knelt, cupped the boy's shoulders. "You ain't done wrong," he said. "You trusted someone you shouldn't. That's how a man learns." The boy nodded, wiping his face. The woman sat beside the hearth, a rifle across her lap. "They'll come," she said. "Not questions next time. Just bullets." The man stared at the map again. Only one name left, the one not crossed. His own. That night, he told the truth. "I did things. During the war. Killed men who weren't soldiers. Took orders I shouldn't have. Left one boy alive. Thought maybe if I left him breathing, it'd be enough to balance the scale." The woman didn't blink. "You think this is him?" He nodded. "Same eyes. Same scar above the lip. He grew up mean. Maybe I made him that way." She looked at the boy, asleep by the fire. "Then you owe it to this one not to run again." The man looked older in the firelight. Not tired. Just finished. "I'll stand," he said. "But I can't promise it won't get ugly." The woman rose, took the rifle in both hands. "Ugly's fine. Just don't let it be pointless." Outside, the wind shifted. And this time, the thunder wasn't far behind. The first shot came just before dawn. A single crack across the land, sharp as a snapped bone. It echoed through the hills, chased by silence, so deep it felt like the world itself held its breath. The man was already awake, sitting on the porch with the rifle resting across his knees, hat low, eyes set on the tree line. He didn't flinch. The woman was inside, loading shells one by one into the old revolver she hadn't touched since the war took her husband and the law took her land. Her hands were steady. The boy crouched by the root cellar, gripping the carving so tight the wood bit into his palm. He knew better than to cry. The second shot tore through the corner of the barn. Straw caught fire. The wind helped it along. The man stood. "No more running," he whispered, not to himself, not to God, just to the earth. It seemed to answer with a low rumble, distant hooves drumming the hard pan like warning. For riders came into view, silhouettes at first. One broke off, circling wide. The other three fanned out and rode straight for the house. Dust rose behind them like a funeral banner. The man stepped off the porch. The woman was beside him before he spoke. "You stay back," he said. She didn't. Another shot rang out. Splinters flew from the fence post near the boy's head. The woman turned without thinking and fired once. A scream answered, high and raw. One horse veered off, rider sagging. The man didn't look away. Two left, he said. Three, she replied. The third wasn't among the riders. He was already in the house. The boy heard the floor creak behind him. Too heavy to be mama, too sure to be a stranger. He didn't scream, just slid behind the stove and held the carving like a knife. The man turned when he heard the window break. He didn't need to say a word. The woman ran inside, boots slamming on the floorboards, firelight flickering on her face. Inside, the intruder moved slow, deliberate. A black scarf over his face. A knife in his hand. He called the boy's name once, soft like a lullaby, twisted into threat. The boy didn't answer. The woman didn't warn before she fired. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spun him into the wall. He dropped the knife, but not the hate. He reached for the boy anyway, groping through blood. This time, the boy screamed. The man heard it. He didn't wait. He crossed the distance to the door like the land owed him nothing, and he meant to collect. He shot once, through the window. Glass exploded. A shadow dropped. Then the final rider came into view, walking his horse, rifle slung over one shoulder. Clean boots. A smile too wide. The visitor. He tipped his hat as the man stepped off the porch. That name you buried? I dug it back up. You gonna kill me with it? The man asked. No. Just gonna carve it into a headstone. The man raised his rifle. The visitor dropped his. I ain't armed, he said. Ain't here to kill you. Just to see if you still bleed. Behind them, the barn crackled with flame. Inside the house, the boy cried out again. The woman's voice followed, sharp, commanding. Alive. The visitor's smile faded. You left me in the ashes, he said. I was 12. I spared you, the man replied. You ruined me. You ruined yourself. The visitor stepped closer. What's the boy to you? He's the one thing I didn't ruin. Silence stretched. The visitor looked toward the house, then back. His hand hovered, then dropped. I could shoot you now, he said. You won't. Why not? Because you already know what I paid for. The visitor exhaled. We're even, he said. No, the man said. But it's enough. The visitor turned, climbed on his horse, and rode off without another word. Dust followed, then silence. Inside, the woman had the boy in her arms, rocking him slow. The dead man lay still, blood pooling under his ribs. The fire outside was dying now, smoke rising straight into the morning sky. The man stood in the doorway, watching. She looked up. We're still here. He nodded. Not for long. They buried the dead in unmarked graves. The wind would cover them soon enough. The barn would need rebuilding. The porch would need new planks. But the house stood. That evening, the man sat with the boy by the garden, the soil scorched, but not lifeless. The boy placed the carving in the dirt and began to dig a shallow hole. You planting it? The man asked. The boy nodded. It won't grow, he said gently. The boy shrugged. Maybe not now. Maybe someday. The man looked to the horizon, where the visitor had disappeared. The sun dipped low, setting fire to the sky in streaks of orange and blood red. He took off his hat, laid it beside him. You got a name, boy? He asked. The boy looked up, puzzled. Not mine, the man said. Yours. The boy was quiet a moment. Then, softly, I want hers. The man nodded once, like he'd expected nothing else. Good choice. Later that night, the woman joined them. Sat beside the man, shoulder brushing his. The boy slept beside the fire, chest rising slow and steady. The man spoke without turning. If I leave in the morning. She stopped him with a touch. You stay. The wind had stilled. The land exhaled. And far off, somewhere behind memory and ash, a name was buried for the last time.